I thought the worst day of my life was identifying my son's body. I was wrong. The worst day was 3 weeks later, when I broke open that concrete foundation with my bare hands and found his wedding ring, still attached to his severed finger. That's when I knew Dominic's gang didn't just kill my boy. They buried him alive. Hit like, subscribe for more devastating betrayal stories, and comment your location. My name is Adrian, and I'm a Navy SEAL commander. For 23 years, I've led men into the darkest corners of the world. I've seen evil that would break most people's minds. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what they did to my son Julian. It started with a phone call at 0300 hours on a Tuesday. Detective Morgan's voice was shaking when she told me they'd found a body in the construction site downtown. Male, early 20s, matches Julian's description. My hands were steady as I drove to the morgue. They always are during a crisis. That's what made me a good commander. But when I pulled back that sheet and saw my boy's face, that's when the warrior in me died, and something much darker was born. Julian's face was barely recognizable. 3 days of torture had carved lines of agony into features that once smiled at my war stories. His eyes, God, his eyes were still open, staring at nothing with a terror that would haunt me forever. The coroner said he'd been beaten with baseball bats, burned with cigarettes, and had his fingers broken one by one. We found him in fresh concrete, Detective Morgan whispered. Looks like they poured it while he was still breathing. I nodded, asked about suspects, took notes like the professional I was trained to be. But inside, something fundamental had snapped. The code I'd lived by, honor, justice, legal process, it all turned to ash in that moment. For 3 weeks, I played the grieving father perfectly, attended the funeral in my dress blues, shook hands with colleagues who offered their condolences, let my wife Eliza cry on my shoulder while I stared at the wall, planning. The police had leads. Rival gang activity in the area. My son had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, they said. A case of mistaken identity. They were working on it. But I wasn't waiting for their justice. I was preparing my own. That's when I decided to visit the construction site where they found Julian. The concrete had been poured over a drainage system, and the winter freeze had already started cracking the foundation. I told myself I just needed to see where my son died. To understand, I brought a sledgehammer. The first crack in the concrete felt like breaking open my own chest. Each swing was a prayer, a curse, a promise of vengeance. Hours passed. My hands bled through my gloves. But I kept swinging until I broke through to the drainage pipe below. That's when I saw it. A flash of gold in the darkness. Julian's wedding ring. The one I'd given him when he married his college sweetheart 2 years ago. But it wasn't alone. His finger was still inside it. I fell to my knees in that hole, holding my son's severed finger, and something inside me went completely black. The finger had been cut off while he was alive. I could tell from the way the bone had splintered. They'd tortured him, taken trophies, then buried him like garbage. But there was more. Wrapped around the finger was a piece of paper, protected by a plastic bag. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Julian's handwriting, weak but determined. Dad, they think I'm someone else. They keep asking about Operation Nightfall. I don't know what that means, but they won't believe me. If you find this, know that I love you. And Dad, they mentioned your name. This isn't random. Someone gave them information about our family. Trust no one. The paper fell from my hands as the full horror hit me. This wasn't a random gang killing. Someone had specifically targeted my son. Someone who knew about classified operations. Someone who knew Julian was my weakness. I looked up from that concrete grave and made a promise to my boy's memory. The men who did this would pay. But first, I needed to find out who betrayed us. As I climbed out of that hole, Julian's severed finger carefully wrapped in my jacket, I felt the last traces of the honorable soldier fade away. In his place stood something the Navy had trained but never intended to unleash on American soil. A hunter, a killer, a father with nothing left to lose. The gang that buried my son alive was about to learn why the Navy SEALs have a motto. The only easy day was yesterday. Their easy days were over. 3 days after finding Julian's finger, I got a package delivered to my house. No return address, just a USB drive and a note. Watch me break your boy, Commander. I should have called Detective Morgan. Should have followed protocol. Instead, I locked myself in my study and plugged in that drive. The video file was labeled Navy SEAL's son screams for daddy. My hand hesitated over the mouse. 23 years of military service had shown me horrors that would shatter civilian minds. But this was different. This was my child. I clicked play. The first frame showed Julian tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. His face was already swollen from beatings, blood streaming from his nose. But his eyes still held defiance, still held hope that his father would come for him. State your name for the camera. A voice commanded from behind the lens. Deep, gravelly, with a slight accent I couldn't place yet. Julian Marcus, my son whispered through split lips. I already told you, I don't know anything about military operations. A laugh echoed through the speakers. Cold, mocking. Your daddy never told you about Operation Nightfall? About the weapons shipment he intercepted in Syria? Julian's confusion was genuine. I could see it in his eyes, the same look he had as a child when grown-ups discuss things beyond his understanding. My dad saves people. He doesn't steal weapons. The camera moved, revealing a man I'd never seen before. Tall, heavily tattooed, with dead shark eyes. But it was the voice that made my blood freeze. This had to be Dominic, the gang leader Detective Morgan had mentioned. See, Julian, your daddy cost me $3 million worth of merchandise. And when someone costs Dominic Reeves money, the man pulled out a pair of bolt cutters. They pay interest. No, please, Julian begged. And hearing my grown son, my strong, brave son, reduced to pleading shattered something in my chest. I don't know about any operation. I work at a tech company. I write code. Dominic grabbed Julian's left hand, positioning the bolt cutters around his pinky finger. This little piggy went to market. I wanted to close the video. Every instinct screamed at me to stop watching. But I owed it to Julian to witness his suffering, to carry this rage. The sound Julian made when they cut off his finger wasn't human. It was the sound of pure agony, of a soul being torn apart. He screamed for me. Dad, please. But I wasn't there. I was probably sitting in some meeting, discussing troop movements while my son was being mutilated. Where is your father's safe house? Dominic asked, moving to the next finger. I don't know. Julian sobbed. We don't talk about his work. It's classified. Another finger. Another inhuman scream. The video continued for 47 minutes. 47 minutes of systematic torture designed to break my son's mind before they broke his body. They burned him with cigarettes, beat him with baseball bats, all while demanding information about operations Julian had never heard of. But the worst part came near the end. Julian, barely conscious, his hands destroyed, whispered something that made my heart stop. There's something you need to know about my dad. What's that, boy? He's not just a SEAL. He's the ghost. Julian's voice was fading, but his words were clear. The one they call the Reaper. And when he finds you, when he finds what you did to me, you're going to wish you'd never been born. Dominic laughed. Your daddy's reputation doesn't scare me, kid. By the time he finds this video, you'll be nothing but concrete mix. That's when Julian did something that made me proud and broke my heart simultaneously. He looked straight into the camera, blood streaming down his face, and said, Dad, I know you'll see this. Don't blame yourself. And don't let this destroy who you are. Promise me. Those were my son's last coherent words before they dragged him to the concrete mixer. The video ended with Dominic's face filling the screen. Commander Adrian Marcus, your boy died calling for his daddy. Too bad daddy was too busy playing soldier to save him. You want revenge? Come find me. I'll be waiting. I sat in that chair for 3 hours after the video ended, Julian's severed finger still wrapped in my jacket on the desk beside me. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't racing. I felt empty, cold, like something essential had been surgically removed from my soul. My phone buzzed. A text from unknown number. Warehouse District. Pier 47. Come alone if you want to see where your boy took his last breath. I stood up, walked to my gun's safe, and began selecting weapons. Not the standard issue sidearm of a Navy officer. The custom tools I'd acquired during 23 years of classified operations. Julian had called me the Reaper in that video. It was a nickname I'd earned in places that didn't officially exist, doing things that never officially happened. I'd retired that part of myself when he was born, promising to be the father he deserved. But Julian was gone now, and Dominic Reeves had no idea he'd just awakened something the United States government had spent millions training but prayed would never be unleashed on American soil. As I loaded my weapons, I replayed Julian's final words, "Don't let this destroy who you are." Too late, son. The man you called Dad died watching that video. What was left was something much more dangerous. The warehouse at Pier 47 was exactly what I expected. Abandoned, isolated, perfect for what Dominic thought would be a psychological intimidation game. What he didn't expect was that I'd arrived 6 hours early and had been watching through thermal imaging from a rooftop 3 blocks away. Amateur mistake. In his mind, he was dealing with a grieving father. He had no concept of what 2 decades of special operations training could produce when personal vengeance replaced military discipline. Through my scope, I counted 12 gang members positioned around the building. Armed, but sloppy. They moved like street thugs playing soldier, not understanding that real warfare is about patience, precision, and exploiting your enemy's assumptions. I'd already identified 7 entry points, mapped their patrol patterns, and located what appeared to be Dominic's command position on the 2nd floor. The same room where they'd filmed Julian's torture, based on the window configuration matching the video. But I wasn't going in. Not yet. My phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Commander Blake Harrison, my former teammate and current Pentagon liaison. "Adrian, we know what happened to Julian. Stand down. Let us handle this through proper channels." I typed back, "There are no proper channels for this. You go dark on American soil, and we can't protect you. Think about what Julian would want." I deleted the message thread and powered down the phone. Blake was right about one thing. Julian wouldn't want this. My son had inherited my sense of justice, but not my capacity for calculated violence. He'd grown up believing his father was a protector, not realizing that protection sometimes required becoming a predator. That innocence died with him in that concrete mixer. At 2,247 hours, I watched Dominic emerge onto the warehouse's loading dock, checking his watch. He expected me to arrive at midnight like some Hollywood movie. Instead, I was already inside. The building's basement connected to the old city tunnel system, a fact that would never appear in any gang member's street-level intelligence. I'd accessed the tunnels through a maintenance entrance 4 blocks away, moving through spaces that had been mapped during a counterterrorism exercise 3 years ago. The first guard died before he knew I was there. Silent, efficient, professional. I felt nothing watching his life leave his eyes, just the satisfaction of crossing one name off a list that had 12 entries. The second guard was smoking near the back stairwell when my knife found the space between his 3rd and 4th vertebrae. He dropped his cigarette, and I caught it before it hit the ground. Details matter in this work. By the time I reached the main floor, I'd eliminated 5 of Dominic's men without firing a shot. The remaining 7 were spread between the ground floor and Dominic's 2nd floor command center. But I wasn't hunting them all tonight. I was hunting information. The gang's communications hub was a joke. 3 laptops, 2 cell phones, and a police scanner any civilian could buy online. But their data was revealing. Text messages, financial records, shipping manifests. This wasn't just a local gang operation. Dominic Reeves was moving military-grade weapons through the port, using connections that suggested federal corruption at levels I hadn't imagined. The Operation Nightfall they'd tortured Julian about wasn't some random name. It was a real classified mission I'd led in Syria 2 years ago. Someone with security clearance had sold that information. But the most devastating discovery was a shipping manifest dated 3 days before Julian's murder. 12 crates of Russian AK-74 assault rifles, 40 cases of military explosives, and something labeled classified payload, Pentagon authorization required. My blood went cold. This wasn't just about revenge for a weapons intercept. Dominic was trafficking stolen American military equipment, and someone in the government was helping him. Julian died because I'd unknowingly disrupted a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of national security. A floorboard creaked above me. Dominic was moving around his command center, probably wondering why his perimeter guards had gone silent. Time to answer his questions. I climbed the stairs like a ghost, muscle memory from 100 night raids guiding each silent step. The hallway stretched ahead, doors on both sides, but thermal imaging had already shown me Dominic's exact position. He was alone, standing by the same window where he'd forced Julian to beg for his life. I didn't announce myself, didn't give him the dramatic confrontation he was expecting. I simply appeared in his doorway like death incarnate, watching his face transform from confidence to confusion to absolute terror. "You're early," he stammered, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. I'd already removed it during my reconnaissance. "Julian called me the Reaper in your little video," I said, my voice carrying the same dead calm I'd used during interrogations in places that didn't exist on any map. "Did you look up that name after he said it?" Dominic's eyes widened. He had looked it up, and now he understood exactly what kind of monster he'd awakened. "The weapons you're moving," I continued, stepping into the room. "The Pentagon authorization codes. Who's your contact?" "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out Julian's severed finger, still wearing his wedding ring, and placed it on the table between us. "This is what's left of my son's hand after you tortured him for information he didn't have. Now you're going to give me information you do have, or I'm going to show you techniques that make your little bolt cutters look like children's toys." Dominic tried to run, 3 steps toward the door before I put him on the ground, his arm twisted at an angle that made him scream. "The contact," I repeated. General Preston Walsh at the Pentagon," he gasped. "He's been selling weapons to private contractors. Your son wasn't supposed to be there that night. We thought he was Walsh's new courier." My world tilted. General Walsh had been my commanding officer during Operation Nightfall, a man I'd trusted, respected, served under for 5 years. A man who'd spoken at Julian's funeral 3 weeks ago. Walsh ordered the hit. "No, we grabbed your son by mistake. When we realized who he was, Walsh told us to make it look like a gang killing. Said it would be cleaner than admitting the mistake." The rage that consumed me then wasn't human. It was something primal, volcanic, unstoppable. General Walsh hadn't just betrayed his country. He'd ordered my son's murder to cover up his own crimes. "Where is Walsh now?" "There's a meeting tomorrow night. Pier 23. He's expecting a shipment from Eastern Europe." I stood up, leaving Dominic broken on the floor. "If you're lying, I'll come back for you. And next time, I'll bring power tools." Walking away from that warehouse, I realized my war was just beginning. Dominic was small game, a street-level criminal who'd gotten in over his head. But General Walsh represented something much more dangerous. Systemic corruption that had used my son as collateral damage. Tomorrow night, I'd settle that debt in full. General Preston Walsh lived in a colonial mansion in Georgetown, surrounded by the kind of security that screamed important government official to anyone watching. Motion sensors, cameras, a patrol schedule timed to military precision. The man had forgotten one crucial detail about security systems. I'd helped design half of them during my Pentagon consulting years. But I wasn't going to his house. Not yet. Instead, I was sitting in a coffee shop across from his daughter's private school, watching his 16-year-old daughter Ivy get dropped off by a driver who looked more like a bodyguard than chauffeur. Walsh was protecting his family while he destroyed mine. My phone buzzed with a message from Detective Morgan. Adrian, I need to see you. Found something in Julian's apartment that changes everything. 20 minutes later, I was standing in my dead son's living room, staring at a wall covered in photographs, documents, and red string connecting dozens of names and faces. Julian had been investigating something that got him killed. When did you find this? I asked Morgan, studying a surveillance photo of General Walsh shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. Yesterday, Julian's landlord let us in to box up his belongings. This whole wall was hidden behind a bookshelf. She pointed to a laptop computer still open on his desk. Your son was a hell of an investigative reporter, Commander. Look at what he discovered. The laptop screen showed a folder labeled Pentagon Corruption Files. Inside were hundreds of documents, shipping manifests, financial records, encrypted communications, and video footage of weapons transfers happening in broad daylight at military installations. Julian hadn't been randomly targeted. He'd been hunting the same conspiracy that ultimately killed him. This goes back 18 months, Morgan continued, opening another folder. Your son was tracking weapons that disappeared from classified operations and ended up in civilian hands. He identified 7 military officials, 12 private contractors, and at least 30 gang operations involved in the trafficking network. I scrolled through the files, my stomach dropping with each new revelation. Julian had documented everything. How military equipment from failed operations was being sold to private buyers. How classified mission information was leaked to ensure maximum theft opportunities. How American soldiers died in combat while their own weapons were sold to the highest bidder. He was building a case, I whispered, finding a draft article titled The Pentagon's Dirty War. How American soldiers are dying for profit. Commander, there's something else. Morgan's voice was grim. She opened a video file dated 2 days before Julian's murder. My son's face appeared on screen, excited but nervous. If you're watching this, something happened to me, Julian's recorded voice said. I got too close to the truth, and they know it. Dad, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you what I was working on. I know how much you believe in the military, in honor and duty. But what I found, it would destroy everything you've sacrificed for. The video continued. General Walsh isn't just selling weapons. He's been sabotaging your missions, making sure equipment falls into enemy hands so he can buy it back through shell companies and resell it domestically. Remember that ambush in Syria where you lost 3 men? Walsh leaked your position to ensure maximum chaos and weapons recovery. My vision went red. 3 good soldiers had died in that ambush. Men with families, children who would grow up without fathers. And it was all orchestrated by my own commanding officer for profit. There's more, Dad. Walsh has been monitoring our family for months. He knows about Mom's medical appointments, about my girlfriend Brooke, about your retirement plans. He sees us as loose ends in a very profitable operation. I've hidden copies of all evidence in 3 locations. If something happens to me, look for. The video cut off abruptly. Julian's final message, interrupted by the doorbell that probably announced his killer's arrival. I turned to Morgan. Where are the other evidence caches? We found one at his office, another at his girlfriend's apartment. But Commander, she hesitated. Brooke Harper disappeared the same night Julian was murdered. We think they took her too. The room started spinning. Julian's girlfriend was alive, possibly being held by the same animals who tortured my son. Another innocent caught in Walsh's web of greed and betrayal. Any leads on her location? Brooke's credit card was used at a gas station near the Maryland border yesterday. Could be her captors, could be her trying to send a signal. We're checking surveillance footage. I stood up, my mind already planning. Detective, I need you to turn this laptop over to FBI agent Blake Harrison at the Pentagon. He's clean. I'd stake my life on it. Tell him to activate Project Safeguard protocols. He'll know what that means. Where are you going? To get answers. What I didn't tell Morgan was that I'd already identified my first target from Julian's research. Colonel Felix Hartman, Walsh's logistics coordinator and the man responsible for losing weapons during overseas operations. Hartman lived alone in a Virginia farmhouse, confident in his isolation and the legitimacy of his cover identity. What he didn't know was that I'd been watching him for 6 hours, learning his routines, identifying his vulnerabilities. At 2,200 hours, I cut his power lines and phone connections. At 22:03, I disabled his vehicle. At 22:05, I was standing in his kitchen when he came downstairs to check the circuit breaker. The look on his face when he found me sitting at his dinner table was worth the risk of exposure. Pure terror. The same expression Julian must have had when Dominic's men grabbed him off the street. "Colonel Hartman," I said conversationally, as if we were discussing weekend plans. "We need to talk about the weapons you've been stealing from dead American soldiers." He tried to reach for a gun mounted under his kitchen counter, a hiding spot I'd already discovered and emptied during my reconnaissance. "Looking for this?" I held up his service weapon. Glock 19, standard issue. Same model my son carried when he was researching your little side business. Funny thing about Julian, he was always thorough in his investigations. Found records of every weapon you've stolen, every soldier who died because equipment wasn't where it was supposed to be. "You don't understand," Hartman stammered. "The military-industrial complex is broken. We're just redistributing resources more efficiently." I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Redistributing? Is that what you called it when you sold armor-piercing rounds to the gang that murdered my son? Efficient resource management. Julian wasn't supposed to die? Walsh said we could scare him off the story, make him think it was too dangerous to publish. But Dominic's crew decided torture and concrete burial was more persuasive than intimidation." Hartman's face went pale. "I didn't know they would. Walsh said it would be handled quietly." I leaned forward, letting him see the absolute coldness in my eyes. "Colonel, you're going to give me every detail of Walsh's operation. Names, locations, financial accounts, communication protocols. Everything Julian died trying to expose. And if I refuse?" I placed Julian's severed finger on the table between us, still wearing his wedding ring. "Then you'll discover why they call me the Reaper. And Colonel, I've got all night." Colonel Hartman broke after 47 minutes. Not from physical torture, I didn't need to touch him. 23 years of psychological operations training had taught me that the mind breaks faster than the body, and fear of the unknown is more powerful than any pain you can inflict. I simply sat across from him at his kitchen table, occasionally cleaning my knife, while describing in clinical detail what had been done to Julian during those 3 days of captivity. Every cut, every burn, every broken bone. When Hartman tried to look away, I tapped Julian's severed finger against the wood until his eyes returned to mine. "The shipping container at Port Elizabeth," he finally whispered. "Container 47 Delta. That's where they're keeping the girl. Brooke Harper. Yes, Walsh wants to use her as leverage against you. If you back down from hunting the network, he'll let her live." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "And if I don't back down?" "She becomes another concrete casualty." The methodical rage that had sustained me for weeks crystallized into something sharper, more focused. Walsh wasn't just covering up his crimes. He was actively hunting my family to protect his profit margins. "The meeting at Pier 23 tomorrow night," I continued. "Who else will be there?" Hartman's hands were shaking as he opened his laptop, showing me encrypted files I'd never have accessed without his cooperation. 12 buyers from different criminal organizations, each one purchasing enough military hardware to outfit a small army. AK-74s, RPGs, Semtex explosives, even prototype night vision equipment. I studied the buyer list. Names I recognized from FBI most wanted databases, faces that belonged to domestic terrorists, international arms dealers, and cartel lieutenants. Walsh wasn't just selling to street gangs. He was arming America's enemies with American weapons. "How long has this been happening?" 3 years. Started small, a few missing rifles here and there. But when Walsh realized how much money was involved, Hartman pulled up financial records. Last month alone, they moved $14 million in stolen equipment. $14 million. Enough to fund entire terrorist operations by congressional votes or eliminate inconvenient investigators like my son. The other military officials involved? General Walsh coordinates everything, but he's got help. Major Quinn Anderson handles shipping logistics. Captain Victor Reeves manages the gang connections. He's Dominic's older brother and the real brains behind the street operations. Lieutenant Colonel Mason Torres runs interference with federal investigations. I memorized each name, each face, each role in the conspiracy that had murdered Julian. But one detail made my blood freeze. Victor Reeves is Dominic's brother? Older brother. Career military, decorated officer, completely clean record. He recruited Dominic's gang specifically because family ties guaranteed loyalty and silence. The full scope of Julian's murder became clear. This wasn't random gang violence or even a simple case of mistaken identity. Victor Reeves had ordered his brother to grab Julian, knowing exactly who he was and what he represented, a threat to their entire operation. My son had been executed as a message, a demonstration of how far Walsh's network would go to protect their profits. Where is Victor Reeves stationed? Pentagon Basement, Sublevel 3, Counterintelligence Division. He has access to every investigation into military equipment theft. That's how they've stayed ahead of federal law enforcement. I stood up, sliding Hartman's laptop into my bag along with the USB drives containing his evidence files. Colonel, you're going to disappear tonight. Drive to the FBI field office in Richmond, ask for Agent Blake Harrison, and tell him everything you just told me. If you run instead, if you warn Walsh's people, I'll hunt you down and show you exactly what I did to the last man who helped kill my son. What about my family? My career? 20 years of service. Your career ended the moment you decided selling weapons was more profitable than protecting American soldiers. Your family might survive if you cooperate fully with the FBI. That's more consideration than you showed my son. I left Hartman sitting at his kitchen table, staring at Julian's severed finger and probably calculating whether confession or flight offered better survival odds. Either choice would serve my purposes. Cooperation meant more evidence against Walsh, while flight would make Hartman a fugitive and eliminate one more piece from the chessboard. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your son screamed for 3 days before we put him out of his misery. The girl's been screaming for 3 weeks. Want to hear her beg like Daddy's little soldier did? Attached was an audio file. Brooke's voice, weak but unmistakably alive. Adrian, if you can hear this, don't come for me. It's a trap. They're using me too. The recording cut off with the sound of a slap and muffled sobbing. My hands were steady as I typed back. Pier 23. Tomorrow night. Come alone, and the girl lives. The response came immediately. Change of plans, Commander. Container 47 Delta at Port Elizabeth. Tonight at midnight. Come armed if it makes you feel better. Won't matter. I was already in my truck, GPS routing me toward the port, when the real trap revealed itself. A news alert on my phone. FBI raids Pentagon offices in weapons trafficking investigation. Blake had moved too fast. Hartman had reached the FBI, delivered his evidence, and triggered a premature federal response. Walsh and his network would know they were blown within hours, which meant they had nothing left to lose. And a cornered animal with military training and unlimited weapons access was the most dangerous predator on Earth. I pressed the accelerator harder, racing toward Port Elizabeth and what I knew would be a kill-or-be-killed confrontation. Brooke Harper was the last innocent person caught in Walsh's web of greed. If I couldn't save her, Julian's death would have been meaningless. But as the port lights appeared on the horizon, I realized I might be walking into more than just a trap. The audio message from Brooke had included background noise, multiple voices, vehicle engines, radio chatter. This wasn't just about rescuing one hostage. Walsh had assembled his entire network for a final stand. Container 47 Delta sat in the darkest corner of Port Elizabeth, surrounded by stacks of cargo that created perfect sniper positions. I'd been watching through night vision for 30 minutes, counting heat signatures and identifying weapon placements. 12 armed men. Military precision in their positioning. This wasn't Dominic's street gang anymore. These were Walsh's trained killers. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd positioned themselves to contain a grieving father, not hunt a Navy SEAL. I approached from the water side, using shipping containers as cover while I eliminated their perimeter guards. Silent kills, bodies hidden where they wouldn't be discovered until morning. By the time I reached Container 47 Delta, their numbers were down to 8. The container door was unlocked, another tactical error. They wanted me inside, probably wired with explosives or filled with additional shooters. Instead, I found something that stopped my heart. Brooke Harper was chained to a metal chair, but she wasn't broken. Despite 3 weeks of captivity, her eyes held the same defiant fire I'd seen in Julian's torture video. She was fighting, just like my son had fought. "Adrian," she whispered when she saw me. "Julian told me if anything happened, I should find you. There's something you need to know about why they really killed him. Save your strength. We're getting out of here." "No, listen." Her urgency cut through my rescue instincts. Julian wasn't just investigating weapons trafficking. He discovered something worse. Walsh isn't just selling American weapons. He's selling American soldiers. My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Private military contracts. Walsh has been arranging for special forces teams to go missing during overseas operations, then selling their services to the highest bidder. Your men aren't dying in combat, Adrian. They're being captured and enslaved." The container door slammed shut behind me, followed by the distinctive click of an electronic lock engaging. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing Victor Reeves stepping out from behind a stack of weapons crates. "Commander Marcus, the famous Reaper. You're smaller than I expected." I'd studied his file during the drive here. Decorated officer, 15 years of service, expert marksman. But files don't capture the most important detail, the dead emptiness in his eyes that marked him as a genuine sociopath. "Where's Walsh?" "Cleaning up loose ends. Hartman's already been eliminated, along with his FBI contact. Your friend Blake Harrison won't be investigating anything else." Victor smiled, enjoying the impact of his words. "You really thought we'd let you expose 3 years of carefully built operations?" The rage I'd been controlling for weeks finally erupted. Blake had been my closest friend in the military, the godfather Julian had never gotten to know properly. Now he was dead because I'd trusted the wrong people with sensitive information. Julian figured out the soldier trafficking, didn't he? Smart boy. Too smart. He'd identified 6 teams that had been reported Kia, but were actually being sold to Syrian militias, Russian oligarchs, African warlords. Imagine the publicity nightmare. American special forces working as private assassins for foreign governments. I thought about the missions I'd led, the men I'd lost, wondering how many of those casualties were actually betrayals orchestrated by my own command structure. "The torture video," I continued, keeping Victor talking while I assessed the container's weaknesses. "You needed Julian to reveal what he knew before eliminating him. We needed to know how much he'd shared, who else was investigating. Turns out, he'd kept everything secret, even from his girlfriend here." Brooke spoke up, her voice stronger than someone held captive for 3 weeks should possess. "That's not entirely true." Victor and I both turned toward her, confused. "Julian didn't just investigate the conspiracy," she continued, meeting my eyes with an intensity that reminded me of my son. "He infiltrated it. Adrian, your son wasn't a tech company employee. He was working undercover for defense intelligence." The container seemed to tilt around me. "That's impossible. Julian was a civilian. DI recruited him 18 months ago. His journalism background made him perfect for investigating military corruption without raising suspicion. The torture, the murder, it was all real. But Julian died protecting a mission that's bigger than weapons trafficking. Victor raised his weapon, suddenly understanding that he'd revealed too much in front of the wrong audience. Enough talking. Time to join your son, Commander. But I wasn't listening to Victor anymore. I was processing what Brooke had just revealed, connecting pieces that reframed everything I believed about Julian's death. My son hadn't stumbled onto Walsh's conspiracy by accident. He'd been hunting it professionally, using resources and training I'd never known about. The evidence cache in his apartment wasn't amateur detective work, it was an intelligence operation, which meant his murder wasn't random revenge. It was the assassination of a federal agent. Brooke, I said quietly, never taking my eyes off Victor. What was Julian's mission designation? Operation Clean House. Full exposure and prosecution of Pentagon weapons trafficking, with presidential authority to use any means necessary. Victor's face went white. Killing a civilian investigator was bad enough, but murdering a federal agent conducting a presidential mandate was a capital offense that would bring the full weight of the U.S. government down on everyone involved. You stupid bastards, I told Victor. You didn't just kill my son. You declared war on the United States of America. The container's electronic lock disengaged with a soft click. Through the crack in the door, I could see FBI tactical lights cutting through the darkness outside. Blake Harrison's voice echoed through a bullhorn. This is FBI. Container 47 Delta is surrounded. Release the hostages and surrender immediately. Victor spun toward the door, momentarily distracted. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. 3 seconds later, he was on the ground with a broken neck. But as I freed Brooke from her restraints, she grabbed my arm with desperate urgency. Adrian, there's something else. Julian's final message. He discovered where the missing soldiers are being held. Walsh is moving them tonight to prevent rescue. She pressed a folded paper into my hand. Coordinates. 12 Navy SEALs, captured during a mission in Afghanistan 2 years ago. Officially listed as Kia, but they're alive and being sold to a Syrian weapons dealer in 6 hours. I looked at the coordinates, recognizing the location. A private airfield in rural Virginia, less than 3 hours' drive from the port. Julian's mission wasn't finished. His death had exposed the conspiracy, but 12 American soldiers were still trapped in Walsh's trafficking network. As FBI agents stormed the container, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. My son had died as a federal agent protecting American soldiers. Now it was time to finish his mission. The FBI debriefing lasted exactly 8 minutes before I walked out. Agent Harrison's replacement, a bureaucrat named Quinn who'd never seen combat, wanted me to surrender Julian's coordinates and let federal agents handle the soldier rescue. Commander, you're emotionally compromised. This requires professional handling. I looked at him across the interrogation table, thinking about Blake Harrison's body, probably cooling in some Pentagon basement, killed by the same conspiracy this man wanted to handle with proper procedures. Agent Quinn, 12 Navy SEALs have been enslaved for 2 years while your proper procedures filed paperwork. Julian died exposing this. I'm finishing what he started. I stood up and walked toward the door. Commander, if you leave this facility, you'll be considered a fugitive interfering with federal operations. Then you better catch me. Brooke was waiting outside the FBI building, despite being offered protective custody. I'm coming with you, she said before I could speak. This isn't your fight anymore. You've been through enough. Adrian, Julian made me promise something before his last investigation trip. If anything happened to him, I was supposed to help you complete his mission. He knew this day might come. She handed me a duffel bag from her car trunk. Inside were weapons I'd never seen before, military-grade equipment that definitely wasn't available through civilian channels. Julian prepared for this contingency. He said if the official system failed, you'd need tools to work outside it. The coordinates led to Morrison Airfield, a private strip in rural Virginia that specialized in discreet cargo transport. According to Julian's intelligence files, it was a front operation for moving human cargo, trafficked weapons experts, captured soldiers, anyone with valuable skills who could be sold to the highest bidder. We arrived at 0300 hours to find the facility buzzing with activity. 3 cargo planes on the tarmac, armed guards patrolling the perimeter, and warehouse buildings that probably held more than airplane parts. Through binoculars, I counted 18 hostile targets, all carrying automatic weapons. Professional security, not the street thugs from Dominic's crew. Walsh had called in serious muscle for this operation. There, Brooke pointed to a building separate from the main hangars. Julian's notes said captured personnel are held in the isolation facility, away from regular cargo operations. I studied the building's layout, identifying entry points and security vulnerabilities. 2 guards at the front entrance, motion sensors on the windows, probably additional security inside. But something felt wrong. The entire setup was too visible, too obvious for a covert trafficking operation. "This is a trap," I told Brooke. "Walsh knows we're coming." "How?" "The FBI raid at the port was too convenient. Perfect timing, full tactical support, agents in position before we even reached the container. Someone fed them intelligence about our location." I replayed the evening's events, looking for the manipulation. Hartman's confession had triggered the FBI investigation, but federal raids don't happen that quickly without advance planning. Blake Harrison's death proved Walsh had deep corruption within federal law enforcement, which meant our rescue mission was probably being monitored in real time. "So what do we do?" I smiled, feeling the familiar calm that preceded high-stakes operations. "We give them exactly what they're expecting, then do something completely different." The first part of the plan was simple: create a diversion that looked like a failed rescue attempt. I planted explosive charges around the isolation building's perimeter, set to detonate in 20 minutes. When security responded to that threat, they'd find evidence of my presence, but no actual assault. Meanwhile, Brooke and I approached the real target, the main hangar where I'd spotted unusual activity through thermal imaging. The hangar's side entrance was secured with electronic locks that looked military-grade but contained a fatal flaw. They were designed to keep people out, not in. Someone trapped inside could override the system manually, which suggested the 12 missing SEALs might be closer than expected. We slipped inside during a guard rotation, finding ourselves in a warehouse filled with wooden crates marked with Department of Defense shipping codes. Stolen weapons, equipment, and supplies worth millions of dollars. But in the back corner, behind stacks of ammunition boxes, was something that made my blood freeze. 12 metal cages, each containing a man in military fatigues. Faces I recognized from mission briefings, soldiers I'd served with, warriors who'd been reported killed in action 2 years ago. They were alive. Barely. "Commander Marcus?" The voice came from the nearest cage. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brennan, a demolitions expert from my former unit. "Sir, we knew you'd come for us. How long have you been here?" 2 years. They move us between facilities, rent us out for special operations. Made us work for Russian mercenaries, Syrian militias, anyone willing to pay Walsh's fees. I started working on the cage locks, simple mechanical systems designed more for psychological control than actual security. "How many others know about this facility?" "It's not just here, sir. Walsh has soldiers stashed at 12 different locations. We're just the ones scheduled for transport tonight." Brooke was monitoring our communications through a radio scanner she'd found among Julian's equipment. "Adrian, there's chatter about incoming vehicles. Multiple units. ETA 10 minutes. Federal backup?" "Negative. These are Walsh's people. They're moving to contain the situation." I looked at the 12 cages, each containing a soldier who'd been officially declared dead, thinking about logistics. We couldn't extract 12 men through a covert exfiltration. This was going to be a firefight. "Kyle, How combat ready are you and your men? Sir, we've been planning an escape for 18 months. Just needed someone with the skills to get us weapons and transportation. I gestured toward the stacks of stolen military equipment surrounding us. Consider yourselves rearmed. As my former soldiers equipped themselves with their own stolen weapons, I realized Julian's mission had been bigger than exposing corruption. He'd been planning a full rescue operation, using his father's skills and resources to complete what official channels couldn't accomplish. My son had died trying to save these men. Now it was time to finish his work. The explosives at the isolation building detonated right on schedule, drawing security away from our position. Through the hangar windows, I could see tactical lights converging on the decoy location. Gentlemen, I announced to the 12 men who'd officially been dead for 2 years, we have a narrow window to disappear before Walsh's reinforcements arrive. Questions? Staff Sergeant Brennan checked his weapon and smiled for the first time in 24 months. Sir, what are our orders regarding enemy combatants? I thought about Julian's torture video, about Blake Harrison's murder, about 12 American soldiers sold into slavery by their own commanding officer. No prisoners. The firefight lasted exactly 11 minutes. 12 Navy SEALs with 2 years of suppressed rage, armed with their own stolen weapons, against 18 private security contractors who'd never faced real military opposition. It wasn't even close. By the time Walsh's reinforcements arrived, we'd already loaded 3 cargo planes with evidence of the trafficking operation and disappeared into the Virginia countryside. But I wasn't running. I was hunting, because Staff Sergeant Brennan had given me information that changed everything. Commander, Walsh isn't just the Pentagon contact, he'd said while we loaded stolen documents into the aircraft. He's been personally overseeing the soldier auctions, travels to meetings, negotiates prices, even participates in the torture sessions to break resistance. The man I'd served under for 5 years, who'd spoken at Julian's funeral, who'd shaken my hand and offered condolences for my son's death, was personally involved in enslaving American soldiers. But the detail that made my vision go red was simpler. Walsh had recognized Julian during the initial kidnapping. He'd known exactly who was being tortured in that warehouse. And he'd watched the entire video before ordering my son's execution. Now I was standing outside Walsh's Georgetown mansion at 0400 hours, watching him through thermal imaging as he paced frantically through his home office, probably trying to coordinate damage control for a conspiracy that was collapsing around him. The 12 rescued SEALs were already en route to a secure facility where they'd be debriefed by legitimate federal agents. Brooke was safely hidden at a Defense Intelligence safe house. The evidence we'd recovered would destroy Walsh's network permanently, but evidence wouldn't bring back Julian, and it wouldn't satisfy the promise I'd made to my son's memory. I disabled Walsh's security system using codes I'd memorized during my Pentagon consulting years, then entered through his kitchen door like a ghost returning from the grave. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing financial documents, and probably calculating how much money he could salvage before fleeing the country. $47 million in offshore accounts, according to the papers spread across his mahogany surface. $47 million earned by selling American soldiers like cattle. General Walsh. He spun around, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and terror in the space of 3 seconds. Adrian, the FBI raid was. I can explain everything. I'm sure you can. Start with why you ordered my son tortured for 3 days before having him buried alive. Walsh's hand moved toward a desk drawer, probably containing a weapon. I was already behind him before he completed the motion, one hand on his throat, the other holding Julian's severed finger where he could see it. This is what's left of my son after your people finished with him. Now you're going to tell me exactly what happened in that warehouse. Adrian, you don't understand. Julian was threatening national security. The weapons program he was investigating. I increased pressure on his throat. Julian was a DIA agent conducting a presidential mandate. You ordered the torture and murder of a federal agent. He wouldn't stop asking questions. The trafficking operation was supposed to be temporary, just until we could restructure defense contracts. But your son was going to expose everything before we could transition to legitimate operations. Legitimate. I pulled out my phone, showing him photos from the airfield. 12 Navy SEALs sold into slavery. American soldiers forced to work for foreign militaries. How exactly do you transition that into legitimacy? Walsh's composure finally cracked completely. Those men were listed as casualties anyway. Dead soldiers can't file complaints or demand back pay. We gave them purpose, Adrian. Useful employment instead of meaningless deaths. The casual callousness of his justification triggered something deep and primal in my chest. This man had convinced himself that enslaving American soldiers was a business decision. Julian's torture video, I continued. You watched it, didn't you? I had to verify. Had to make sure he hadn't shared classified information. You watched my son beg for his life. You watched them cut off his fingers. You heard him call for his father while you did nothing to stop it. Walsh tried to speak, but I tightened my grip on his throat. Here's what's going to happen, General. You're going to write a complete confession detailing every aspect of your trafficking operation. Names, locations, financial accounts, government contacts. Everything Julian died trying to expose. And if I refuse? I smiled, letting him see the same dead calm that had terrified Dominic and Victor Reeves. Then I'm going to show you exactly what I learned during 23 years of classified operations. Techniques that make your torture videos look like children's games. Walsh's resistance collapsed. For the next 2 hours, he wrote steadily, documenting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military and civilian government. Senators who'd received campaign contributions from defense contractors involved in the trafficking. Pentagon officials who'd falsified casualty reports to hide soldier kidnappings. FBI agents who'd buried investigations in exchange for offshore payments. But the most devastating confession was personal. Julian wasn't randomly targeted, Walsh wrote. I'd been monitoring Commander Marcus's family for 18 months, waiting for leverage to use against him if he discovered the trafficking operation. When Julian began his investigation, I saw an opportunity to eliminate 2 threats simultaneously. I read the confession 3 times, processing the full scope of the betrayal. Walsh hadn't just ordered my son's murder. He'd been planning to use Julian as leverage against me for over a year. Sign it, I ordered. Walsh's signature was shaky but legible. What happens now, Adrian? Do you kill me like you killed the others? I looked at this man who'd destroyed so many lives for money, who'd watched my son's torture video with clinical interest, who'd convinced himself that slavery was a business model. No, General. I'm going to let you live. The relief in his eyes lasted exactly 3 seconds. You're going to live long enough to stand trial. To face the families of every soldier you sold. To watch your reputation, your legacy, your entire life's work collapse in front of cameras and congressional hearings. Death would be mercy, General. And you don't deserve mercy. I left him sitting at his desk, surrounded by signed confessions that would destroy dozens of careers and result in life sentences for everyone involved in Julian's murder. But as I walked away from that mansion, I realized my war wasn't over. Julian's investigation had exposed one trafficking network. But according to Walsh's confession, there were others. 12 more facilities. 12 more groups of enslaved soldiers. My son had died trying to save them all. The courtroom was packed with families who'd mourned soldiers declared killed in action, not knowing their sons and brothers had been sold into slavery. Camera crews from every major news network lined the walls as General Preston Walsh was led to the defendant's table in shackles. I sat in the front row, holding Brooke's hand, watching the man who'd ordered Julian's murder face the consequences of 2 years of systematic betrayal. Judge Oliver Patterson had been personally selected by the Attorney General for this case, a former Marine with zero tolerance for military corruption. The same judge who'd sent 3 Pentagon contractors to federal prison the previous year for stealing veteran benefits. The United States versus General Preston Walsh and 17 co-conspirators, Judge Patterson announced. Charges include conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, treason, and the murder of Defense Intelligence Agent Julian Marcus. The prosecution's opening statement lasted 4 hours. Federal prosecutor Natalie Morrison methodically detailed how Walsh's network had sold 147 American soldiers to foreign militaries over 3 years, generating $89 million in illegal profits. But it was the personal testimony that destroyed Walsh completely. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brennan took the stand first, describing 2 years of forced labor for Syrian mercenaries. How Walsh had personally negotiated his sale price. How captured soldiers were tortured until they agreed to work for foreign governments. General Walsh visited our facility 6 times, Brennan testified. He called us his premium assets. Said we were worth more alive than the death benefits our families had already received. The courtroom gasped when Brennan revealed that families had been paid death benefits for soldiers who were actually being rented out as private assassins. Then came the video evidence. Julian's torture footage played on screens throughout the courtroom. 47 minutes of systematic brutality that reduced spectators to tears and sent 2 jurors to the hospital with panic attacks. But the most damaging moment came when Prosecutor Morrison played audio of Walsh's phone conversation with Dominic Reeves during Julian's captivity. Make sure the boy understands his father can't protect him, Walsh's recorded voice said. Break his fingers slowly. I want Marcus to know this is personal. The jury looked physically ill hearing their nation's uniform discussed like a business transaction. Walsh's defense attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, claiming the stress of military command had broken his client's judgment. The jury deliberated for 37 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Judge Patterson's sentencing was swift and brutal. General Walsh, you have betrayed every principle of military service. You sold American soldiers like livestock while their families mourned them as heroes. Your actions constitute the highest form of treason imaginable. Life in federal prison without possibility of parole. 17 co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 25 to 50 years. But the real justice came afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom. Maria Santos, whose son Sergeant Diego Santos had been sold to a Russian oligarch, approached Walsh as federal marshals prepared to transport him to prison. My boy was 19 when you declared him dead, she said, tears streaming down her face. I buried an empty coffin while you made money renting him out as a killer. 20 years old when we found him, broken and traumatized, unable to even speak his own name. Walsh tried to look away, but she grabbed his chin, forcing eye contact. Look at me when I'm talking to you. My son will spend the rest of his life in therapy because of what you did. But he's alive. Julian Marcus isn't. That boy died protecting soldiers like Diego, and his father is the only reason any of our children came home. She released Walsh's face with disgust. I hope you live a very long time in prison, General. Long enough to remember every face of every soldier you sold. As Walsh was led away in shackles, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Julian's death. Peace. Not happiness. That would take years to rebuild. But the crushing weight of rage and helplessness was finally lifting. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me with questions about vigilante justice and military corruption. I gave them the same answer Julian would have given. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring this never happens to another family. Detective Morgan found me as the crowd dispersed. Adrian, there's something you should know. We found Julian's final case files in his apartment safe. He'd been investigating Walsh for 2 years, building an airtight case. Everything that happened, the rescue operation, the evidence gathering, even Walsh's confession, Julian had planned it all as contingency protocols. She handed me a sealed envelope marked for Dad, if I don't make it home. Inside was a letter in Julian's handwriting. Dad, if you're reading this, my investigation went wrong. But everything I discovered is documented in the files Detective Morgan will give you. The soldier trafficking network is bigger than Walsh. There are 12 other facilities, possibly hundreds more enslaved soldiers. I couldn't expose it all before they silenced me, but I trust you to finish what I started. Use my evidence. Find our missing brothers. Bring them home. And Dad, don't let this consume you. I died doing what I believed was right. Honor that by living for something greater than revenge. I looked up at Morgan through tears I hadn't shed since the funeral. The other facilities Julian mentioned already being raided by joint federal task forces. Your son's investigation was so thorough that agents are finding sites exactly where his intelligence predicted. 68 more soldiers rescued so far, with operations continuing. Brooke appeared beside me, no longer the traumatized hostage, but the strong woman Julian had fallen in love with. Adrian, there's something else. Julian made me promise to tell you after Walsh's trial ended. She took my hand, guiding it to her still flat stomach. I'm pregnant. Julian knew before he died. He said if anything happened to him, our child would need a grandfather who understood that protecting family means protecting everyone's family. The courthouse steps blurred through my tears as I realized Julian's legacy wasn't just the conspiracy he'd exposed or the soldiers he'd saved. It was the new life growing inside the woman he'd loved, and the choice I now faced between continuing to hunt monsters or learning to build something worth protecting. My son had died as a hero. Now I had to decide whether to live as one. 6 months after Walsh's conviction, I was standing in Arlington National Cemetery, watching them install Julian's headstone. Not the temporary marker that had been there since his burial, but a permanent granite memorial that told the truth about how he died. Julian Marcus, Defense Intelligence Agent, died protecting American soldiers. Brooke stood beside me, her pregnancy now visible, one hand resting on her growing belly. Around us, families of the rescued soldiers had gathered to honor the man who'd sacrificed everything to save their sons. He would have been a good father, Brooke whispered, watching me place Julian's Navy SEAL trident on the fresh headstone. He already was, just not to his own child. The congressional hearings had ended 3 weeks ago with sweeping military reforms and the establishment of new oversight protocols for overseas operations. Julian's investigation had sparked the largest military corruption prosecution in American history. 137 soldiers rescued from trafficking networks. 43 Pentagon officials prosecuted. $89 million in stolen funds recovered and returned to military family assistance programs. But the number that mattered most to me was simpler. One grandchild, due in 4 months, who would grow up knowing their father died as a hero. My phone buzzed with a message from Staff Sergeant Brennan, who'd been promoted and assigned to the new Military Personnel Recovery Task Force. Commander, we found something you need to see. Can you meet at the Pentagon? An hour later, I was sitting in a secure briefing room, looking at surveillance footage that made my blood run cold. This was taken 3 days ago at a shipping facility in Houston, Brennan explained. We thought we'd shut down Walsh's entire network, but apparently there was one more operation we missed. The video showed men in military fatigues being loaded into cargo containers, supervised by someone I recognized from the trafficking trials, Major Quinn Anderson, one of Walsh's logistics coordinators who'd somehow avoided prosecution. Anderson was supposed to be under federal supervision, I said. How is he running operations? Corrupt federal marshals. We think there are still Pentagon officials we haven't identified, people who helped Anderson continue trafficking while we were focused on Walsh's network. Detective Morgan entered the briefing room, carrying a file that looked disturbingly thick. Adrian, we intercepted communications between Anderson and buyers in Eastern Europe. He's got 26 American soldiers scheduled for transport tomorrow night. 26 more families who thought their sons were dead while those soldiers were actually being sold like equipment to the highest bidder. Where's the transport happening? Port of Houston, Warehouse 15. But there's a problem. Anderson knows we're onto him. He's accelerated the timeline and increased security. 40 armed guards, military-grade weapons, and the transport ships are leaving at midnight whether the soldiers are loaded or not. I studied the facility layout, recognizing the tactical challenges. This wasn't like the Morrison Airfield rescue, where we'd had surprise and superior training. Anderson had learned from Walsh's mistakes. What does Federal Command want to do? Brennan's expression darkened. They want to negotiate. Offer Anderson immunity in exchange for releasing the soldiers. Command is worried about another firefight affecting military recruitment and public confidence. And you disagree? Sir, these are Navy SEALs and Special Forces operators being sold to foreign governments. Some of them have been missing for 3 years. Their families deserve better than political negotiations. I thought about Julian's letter, about his instruction to find missing soldiers and bring them home, about the promise I'd made to his memory and the child who would soon call me grandfather. Detective Morgan, what's the official federal position on civilian involvement in this operation? Officially, any interference with federal operations would result in immediate arrest and prosecution. She paused, then slid a set of keys across the table. Unofficially, my patrol car will be parked outside my apartment tonight, and I'll be taking a very long shower around midnight. Brennan smiled. Sir, 12 of the soldiers Anderson is trafficking are from our former unit. Men we served with, led into combat, promised we'd never leave behind. Brennan, you're active military. If you participate in an unauthorized operation, Commander, with respect, some promises are more important than career advancement. 3 hours later, I was loading weapons into Morgan's patrol car, while Brooke helped coordinate communications from a safe distance. Not because she wanted to be involved in another dangerous operation, but because she understood what Julian would have expected. 26 soldiers, she said, monitoring radio chatter through equipment Julian had left behind. 26 families who think they've buried heroes, not knowing their sons are still fighting for their lives. As we drove toward Houston, I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. Walsh was in prison, his network destroyed, Julian's killers brought to justice. This was about finishing what my son had started, bringing every missing soldier home, no matter the cost. Because that's what Julian had died trying to do. And that's what his child would learn their father stood for. The radio crackled with Anderson's voice. Transport ships are in position. Begin loading human cargo immediately. Human cargo? The same dehumanizing language Walsh had used, the same casual dismissal of American soldiers' humanity. But this time, the soldiers Anderson was trying to sell had something Walsh's victims hadn't. A rescue team that included their former commanding officer and a dead agent's pregnant girlfriend, both determined to honor a promise made at a graveside. Julian's mission was almost complete. Just 26 more soldiers to save. The rescue at Port of Houston lasted 18 minutes. 26 American soldiers, some held captive for 3 years, walked free while Major Quinn Anderson and his 40 mercenaries surrendered without firing a shot. Not because we overpowered them, but because Staff Sergeant Brennan had done something brilliant. He'd contacted the families of every trafficked soldier and invited them to Houston. When Anderson's security team saw 200 military families standing outside Warehouse 15, holding photos of sons and daughters they'd thought were dead, the mercenaries simply laid down their weapons. You can't fire on Gold Star mothers. Not even criminals have that little humanity. But the moment that broke me completely came when Master Sergeant Diego Santos, the same soldier whose mother had confronted Walsh in the courthouse, stumbled out of that cargo container and saw his family waiting. "Mama," he whispered, barely recognizing the woman who'd aged 10 years mourning his death. "Mijo, you're home. You're finally home." I watched that reunion through tears, thinking about Julian and the family moment he'd never get to experience. But then Brooke took my hand, placing it on her belly where our grandchild was growing. "Julian is home," she whispered. "He's just coming back differently than we expected." 6 months later, I was holding Julian Marcus Harper, named after his father, carrying his mother's last name, in the delivery room of Walter Reed Medical Center. 8 pounds, 3 ounces of pure miracle, with Julian's eyes and his mother's determination. The first person to visit wasn't family. It was Maria Santos, Diego's mother, carrying a baby blanket she'd knitted herself. "This is for Julian's son," she said, wrapping the blanket around my grandson. "From all the families your boy saved. From all the mothers who got their children back because of what he sacrificed." The blanket was covered in patches from military units whose soldiers had been rescued: Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Special Forces, Marine Recon. 163 soldiers brought home because Julian had refused to let corruption hide behind classified operations. But the patch that made me cry was simple: Defense Intelligence Agent Julian Marcus. American hero, never forgotten. As I rocked my grandson to sleep, I realized Julian's real legacy wasn't the conspiracy he'd exposed or the soldiers he'd saved. It was the choice he'd made to protect others, even when it cost him everything. The same choice I was now teaching this child to make. 3 years have passed since that night in the warehouse where I found Julian's severed finger. The Pentagon has new oversight protocols. Military trafficking has been virtually eliminated. The families of rescued soldiers have found peace. And I've found something I didn't expect: happiness. Not the naive happiness I'd known before Julian's death, but something deeper. The satisfaction of knowing that evil was confronted, justice was served, and innocent people were protected by someone willing to pay the ultimate price. Julian Marcus Harper is walking now, babbling words that sound suspiciously like "Daddy" when he looks at Julian's photo on our mantle. Brooke and I are raising him with stories about his father's courage, his sacrifice, his absolute refusal to let bad people hurt good families. Sometimes I wonder what Julian would think about the man I became during those months of hunting his killers. Whether he'd approve of the violence, the rage, the calculated brutality I used against men who tortured him. But then I look at his son, our son now, and I know Julian would understand. Some battles choose you. Some fights demand everything you have. Some promises can only be kept by people willing to become monsters so others can remain human. Julian died keeping that kind of promise. I lived to honor it. And now I'm teaching his son that protecting family means protecting everyone's family. Emotional finale question, but here's what I need to know from you. Where are you watching this from? Are there other families out there dealing with betrayal, corruption, or injustice that needs to be exposed? Because Julian's story isn't unique. It's happening in boardrooms and military bases and government offices around the world. Hit that like button if this story reminded you that heroes aren't born. They're made by impossible choices. Subscribe because I'm bringing you more epic revenge stories and thrilling tales of justice served cold. And comment below